Okay, so after the last two things you uploaded, I begged you
Oh,
to please attempt to get the podcast back on track by recording something that actually had substance to it.
well, James Franco takes offense to your comment.
Good.
If we ask Tommy Wiseau to come on, do you think he'll come?
He has played Dark Souls.
Oh, so maybe.
There was an area that was cut from Dark Souls 3, and we're going to talk about that.
Good.
Good. That's what we'll talk about. Okay, so when we say an area that was cut, we don't mean like in Canehurst and Bloodborne where like some buildings were cut. We mean like this is a real deal, complete, like substantial area of the game that was cut. Kind of comparable to the way that the Northern Limit area was cut from Demon Souls. So, at the very beginning of Dark Souls 3, after you beat you are on this, like, it's like this thing used to be a path, but it's broken. You're just standing on a cliff that used to be a road. And if you look down, there is a huge bridge below you. And the assumption that, like, I made, and, like, I talked to a lot of people, and we all kind of, like, assumed the same thing was, oh, the bridge underneath you is the bridge that used to connect to the area where you fought Vord. And it's just fallen down, and that's why it's broken. And, like, that sort of, that kind of made sense, because when you went down to the bridge, like, one end of the bridge was completely, like, was locked. There's just, like, a pile of rubble, and there's a demon in front of it patrolling. And if you beat the demon, I don't know if it's the soul or like an item you get from the demon, but it basically says like this demon was the gatekeeper of Lothric. So the assumption was, okay, there used to be this massive bridge. It led through the series of gates up to the main gate of Lothric Castle, and there's a demon patrolling it. Like, okay, fine. But the more we have looked into it, the more it looks like that bridge didn't connect to the top of Lothric Castle, it connected to the bottom of Lothric Castle. And instead of leading to the area where you fight Vord, it would have led to, it looks like a large forest. And basically what they did was they just deleted the other end of that bridge. So whatever was there is just like gone, and they very hastily just shoved some rocks in the way and said, oh, you can't go there because there's a rock slide. If you want to get a good look at this, you can just see it from the very beginning, from the High Wall of Lothric. If you just look over the edge, you can see that bridge just, like, it just ends in like a void. It, like, very clearly just part of the map is just gone. So, we were all wondering, like, okay, where did this bridge go? And we sort of became more and more interested in it because, when the collector's edition of Dark Souls 3 was announced, they used an image of, like, it came with a cloth map, and they used an image of this map in the promotional artwork. And that image is different to the map that we got. It's based on an earlier design of the game. And that map called out the bridge as an area. It's not really an area in the game at all. It's just a place that you land, and then you go from there to another place.
But wait, where do you land though?
You know, when you beat Vort and then the gargoyles take you down to, like, you land on the end of the bridge, and then you just walk to Undead Settlement from there.
Yeah, so you're saying we wouldn't be flown there? We'd just walk on the bridge?
No, that would still have happened, but, like, the other end of the bridge where the demon's patrolling, you would have been able to continue past there.
Oh.
So, like, this map, it labels the bridge as an area in the game. It doesn't treat it like just a piece of geography, and it calls it the Great Bridge of Pilgrimage.
Okay.
And then, as Sana and Lance have been data mining Dark Souls 3, they have found, like, a few just scattered references to, like, the bridge as an important area.
Like what?
Okay, so there's two there's two text strings I'll talk about. So the first set of text strings, it's very, very early on, and it's from a version of Dark Souls 3 that had a time of day system like Bloodborne. So as you progressed through the game, at certain events, the time of day would change. Similar to like in Bloodborne, when you beat Gascoigne and go into Erden Chapel, it changes from like early evening to late evening. When you touch Lawrence's skull, it changes from evening to night. It would have had a system like that. And it lists in this text string all the events that would have made the time of day change. And one of them is traveling from Lothric Castle to the bridge. Now, that's not the Vort one, because the Vort one there's one that's travel from Lothric Castle to, it's basically the city, meaning Undead Settlement. So when you traveled from Lothric Castle to Undead Settlement, the time of day would advance. Then there's another trigger for the time of day advancing, which is called Trapped in the Depths, which I'll go into later on. And then there's a couple of more triggers. One of them is beating Lorien and Lothric. And then after that, the next time of day changing trigger is travel from Lothric Castle to the bridge. And this is like about 2/3 of the way through the game. Like it's very, very late. So like the game is, the data is saying like at some point you would have gone, this would have been mandatory. You would have had to go from Lothric Castle after you beat Lorien and Lothric, who at this point would have been like, I think they're closer to like the Ornstein and Smo role. They're like a midway boss through the game. You would have beaten Lorien and Lothric, then gone down into Lothric Castle, and then there would have been a path from Lothric Castle to the other side of the bridge, is what it looks like. And that would have been a completely mandatory thing because it's tied to the time of day changing. And it's like the second last thing that made the time of day change. So it's like late in the day. It would have been, I guess, the equivalent of like the Pale Blood Sky in Bloodborne, like the sort of penultimate thing you did. Okay, so what we've established here is that like the bridge was important. It wasn't just like a piece of geometry and it would have led somewhere. And it was important that it led somewhere. On the map that we're talking about that calls it Great Bridge of Pilgrimage, it leads to a forest. The forest isn't named anything. You can just see very clearly the bridge connects to this massive forest.
Is it a PvP forest?
We don't know.
Okay.
So now we bring up the God's Grave.
Okay.
God's Grave is the name of the cut area. It is it's only in Japanese. It is just the kanji for God and the kanji for grave next to each other. So you can read that as like the grave of the gods, or just God Grave, or graves of gods, or whatever. Anyway, or like the cemetery of the gods. You can call it whatever you want.
Do you know what else has graves of gods in it?
Most dark fantasy RPGs.
Bloodborne! In the
Yep.
Forbidden Woods?
Yeah.
And you're saying this would have happened in the woods?
Well, kinda, yeah. It is a bit Chalice Dungeon-y. God's Grave, or God, we'll just call it God's Grave, is what everyone's calling it. It was a cut area. It no longer exists, but like the data pertaining to it exists. And helpfully, this includes the distance model of God's Grave.
Mm-hmm.
So the actual level is gone, but the low poly version of the level that you could see from a distance is still in there. So we can see what it looked like. It has no textures, and it has no objects. It's just the level geometry, like very, very low fidelity version. And it looks like kind of like the catacombs in Dark Souls, where you would start at ground level, and then there's just a series of kind of twisting caves and like drops that lead very, very low down. And it terminates in a weird structure that it kind of looks like when you fight Bed of Chaos. You have to like slide down this huge kind of ramp. It looks like that's at the very bottom of it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's basically it's a catacomb. It's like a prison. It's it's a grave. It's just like a big buried underground chamber. Curiously, there are assets associated with God's Grave that ended up in the Ringed City. So at the beginning of the Ringed City, when you are hiding from the archers behind those gravestones that have the holes in the middle, those are in there. Like, they're an asset for God's grave. So, like, they would have been the graves there.
Or the graves?
Oh, no, the gravestones themselves.
Okay.
Like, presumably those were the graves in God's grave. And along with those, there is an enormous one that isn't used in the Ringed City. It's like, really, it's like kind of like the size of Artorias' grave, like this absolutely massive one. And they all have growing out of them the weird, like, black roots that the game associates with the Dark Soul. The way, like, the Herald Knights in the Ringed City, they have those roots growing out, and the Pilgrims have the roots, the Butterflies have the roots. Those are all over them. They're, like, growing out of the hole in the middle. And there's also these, like, pots, these, like, broken clay pots. They have the roots growing out of them as well. And they are, like, I don't know where they would have gone, but they're associated with it. So the idea is, like, these would have been scattered around. And just in terms of, like, the geometry of God's grave, it looks a bit like in the Ringed City, after you fight Medea for the first time, there is that area called Shared Grave. It's just like a big spiral staircase with coffins and skeletons everywhere.
Yeah.
It looks a bit like that. So I'm thinking, like, maybe bits of that were recycled into, like, bits of God's grave. Like, the tombstones became the beginning of the Ringed City, and then the structure of it became the Shared Grave. It looks a bit like that. And the boss of God's grave.
Is it Manus? Is it Artorias? Is it Ludwig?
Close. The boss is Oseros. What? Damn! This is, like, obviously, I think we all sort of knew that Oseros didn't make any sense where he was at all.
What do you mean Dark Souls 3 makes perfect sense?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, it was all cut for a reason. The reason definitely not we've run out of time and money, oh shit. So Oseros was the boss. He wasn't called Oseros at the time. He is the boss.
He was called Angel Dragon. Angel.
Yeah, he's called Drag, yeah. We've been calling him Angel of the Dragon because that's, like, one way you could read it. But Loki looked at it and he said, like, yeah, that's the literal reading of it, but it doesn't mean that. It means, like, the dragon that is an angel. Like, it's basically like Angel Dragon is the name he was given.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, this is back when, like, the old king of Lothric was just Gundyr. You would fight Gundyr in the room where you fight Oseros now, and Oseros was somewhere else. And we were looking at him with Lance, and it was like, oh, I guess, like, they added the baby and the staff later on. And he was just, like, a dragon boss. No, they did not. The dialogue where he talks about, like, my beloved Ocelot, the child of dragons.
It was always there, right?
It was always there. It's, from what we can tell, that is actually the first dialogue that was written and recorded for Dark Souls 3, was that line.
Did I just predict what you were about to say?
Did you predict it, or did I already tell you this?
No, I'm just predicting things as you're talking.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, snap.
So he has always had a weird dragon baby that he smashed into the ground and screamed, and it was always called Ocelot.
So the first thing that Miyazaki created for the game
was kill a baby.
Yeah. Oh.
Do you think they cut the area just to get rid of that? And then he's like, no! Yeah, he is the boss of that area. And we know this because, like I said, the level's gone, but the data's still there, and Lance got it to load. So he's just, like, in a void that's treated as though it's God's grave. And Dragon Angel is there as the boss with an HP bar and everything. Mm-hmm. Now, it's possible there were other bosses as well. We don't know. But at least one of them was Oseros / Dragon Angel. And he did have a weird baby. called Ocelot.
So I wonder if the whole royal family lived there.
Well, the thing is, like, when it looks like it might have been, it looks like at this point, Archdragon Peak was just part of Lothric Castle. You didn't, like, meditate to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least if you did, it was still, like, physically part of the castle. That's why, like, people probably have noticed this, but when you go into the Consumed King's Garden, it looks like Archdragon Peak. Like, it's got all these, yeah. So it looks like you would have gone, like, underneath the Consumed King's Garden, gone down, down, down to God's Grave. And then, like, God's Grave would have led to, like, it looks like Archdragon Peak was part of the bridge, maybe. Like, it's hard to tell because we just have chunks of, like, level data, but it looks like Archdragon Peak was part of Lothric Castle, and it looks like maybe you went from Lothric Castle down to the bridge through God's Grave, then up to Archdragon Peak. It looks like that was that's kind of from what I can tell, because I'll go into, like, the text string that wasn't relevant before but is now.
Okay.
There's a text string that lists, like, here are the important events in the game. One of them is, like... Oh, no, sorry, but back to time of day again, because I'm an idiot. Listing the times of day.
Mm-hmm.
There's a time of day change for going to the bridge, and then immediately after that, there's a time of day change that's, like... No, wait. No, I was right the first time. Sorry, there's just, like, it's just jumbles of Japanese text and, like, notepad files. Basically, there's a reference to you doing something with the Nameless King at some point after you went to the bridge. So, looks like the bridge, whatever you did at the bridge was necessary to get to Nameless King. But I don't know if that means they were connected or it was just it looks like the very early structure of Dark Souls 3 mimicked the structure of Dark Souls 1, where the first half of the game was linear. And then so, like, you would have gone through, like, these levels in a set order, and then you would fight Lorien and Lothric. And, like, the goal of the game at the start would be to get to the top of Lothric Castle, in the same way that you get to Anor Londo in 1. You'd fight Lorien and Lothric. Then fighting them would unlock, like, the Lords of Cinder. So you would, like, it would be linear. You'd fight Lorien and Lothric, and then after Lorien and Lothric, you got... it would branch off and you could fight... The Lords of Cinder at this point were Nameless King, the Deacons, and the Abyss Watchers. So there were, like, 3 bosses to do after that. So it looks like God's Grave, either that led directly to Archdragon Peak, or it something you did there unlocked the ability to fight Nameless King. But, like, they were connected in some way. Yeah. So there's another kind of part of this that I've been looking into, which is there's a quest. There's a lot of blood in Dark Souls 3, but it doesn't go anywhere. That's why people were saying, "Oh, is it the same as Bloodborne?" Because they talk about blood a lot. Okay, so I want to talk about, like, the initial Profaned capital, which is, like, a bugbear of mine that, like, the more I read into it, the more it kind of makes sense. In its initial form. So, right. Going back to our list of, like, time of day changes. The first time of day changes arrive at Lothric, so that's, like, after the tutorial. Second time of day change is when you go from Lothric Castle to the settlement. Okay. The third time of day change is the Profaned capital. And, like, these are all in sequence. So the third significant thing that changes the time of day in the game is the Profaned capital. So it was really, really early on. So all that, like, if you're wondering, like, hey, why the fuck is this thing just stuck to the side of a cliff? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Correct. Like, it was going to be an early game area and they moved it. And it looks very much like, this is just, like, looking at early models and like data and stuff, what would have happened is the curse. You know how the curse-rotted Greatwood has that enormous pit underneath it, but it goes nowhere. That would have led to the Profaned capital. Maybe through Carthus. I'm not entirely sure, but something would have happened in the settlement that would have resulted in you going to the Profaned capital. And you would have had to go there. And interestingly, there is a list of this is the text file I brought up earlier about like, here are the significant events in the game. And I'm pretty sure it's like, there was going to be an NPC at Firelink who would like have different dialogue depending on what had happened. One of those events is called Captured in the Depths, which it looks like is referring to Irithyll Dungeon, that like you would actually have ended up imprisoned in Irithyll Dungeon at some point, and then had to go to the Profaned capital. And again, there is like a time of day event, and it's tied to the Profaned capital, but it's tied to like, I think it's before. Okay, no. I'm getting confused again. There's a time of day event which is Captured in the Depths. So at some point you would become captured and you would end up in Irithyll Dungeon / Profaned capital. Presumably just in one of the, kind of like Yahagul, I guess, or like Seath. Like you'd just be captured there. And then there's this significant event at the same time as that, which is like confronting the lonesome king of the ruined city. Now, ruined city is what Profaned capital's called at this point.
So in Bloodborne, we have Dignity City, and in Dark Souls, we have Ruined City. Do you think that's a coincidence?
It's true. I don't think it's a coincidence at all.
Okay, good.
The other interesting thing that shows is that even like they played around with who the king of the Profaned capital was, because at one point it was Wolnir, but it looks like whoever it was, they were always called the lonesome king of the Profaned capital.
Oh.
And I read somewhere from like, it was like a QA leak that like can't be verified, but it doesn't seem like they were making it up, which is that the king of the Profaned capital was always called Yorm the Giant, and like that was just Wolnir's name because he's a giant skeleton. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, he's just a giant. He's just an undead giant.
Yeah.
So you would have had to go there, and it would have been like a third of the way through the game. You're in the Profaned capital, like regardless. It's not optional. Now there's the epitaph things that were cut from the game, and Sana dug them up, and so did Lance.
Mm-hmm.
One of those is in Irithyll Dungeon, and it mentions like, it says something like, this is all like in Japanese, so we don't know exactly what they meant, because it's very contextual, but it's like something about someone in Irithyll Dungeon is like, the blood would not accept them. There's a reference to the blood. Like there's some kind of holy blood in that area. Then there is another reference to blood, like some sort of like holy blood or royal blood and an epitaph in Lothric. And if you like line all this up, based on like what these like lists of what happens in what order according to like the time of day changing and according to this, whoever it was who would react to these events. Profaned capital comes after you leave Lothric Castle, but then before you went back to fight Lorien and Lothric. So it looks like what would have happened is you would have left Lothric Castle via the Gargoyles, gone down to Undead Settlement, fought the Curse-Rotted Greatwood. That would collapse the floor. You'd go down there, possibly through Carthus or maybe just through Irithyll Dungeon or something. You would get captured somehow, wind up in the Profaned capital, and then when you were there would be something about blood. You would maybe get blood when you were down there, but then whatever you got down there, whether it was blood or like a key to blood, or it may even have been like the Basin of Vows item, you could then take that back to Lothric, and that would access the second half of it. You know how like now if you beat the Dancer, you can continue on, but the archive key isn't there, so you can't. you can't progress beyond a certain point. It looks like whatever happened in the Profaned capital has to happen before you can go back and fight Lorien and Lothric. And there's references to blood in both places, so it looks like something about blood happens in the Profaned capital. And that gets you access to the next half of Lothric. Almost like how you need to have rung both bells before you can go down Orlando. It looks like you would need something happens in Profaned capital that gets you access to the rest of Lothric. And then once you've done that, you could have gone and fought Lorien and Lothric. And then it looks like that is what opens up the bridge. And that's what would have led to the God's Grave area. And also, like, again, I think we didn't mention this before, but, like, we know that God's Grave, even though it's mostly missing, we know it was, the top half was in a forest because it just uses the same trees that everywhere uses. So they didn't delete the trees. So, like, wherever God's Grave was, there were a whole lot of trees around it. And, like, we have rough kind of positional data for it, and it does line up with where the bridge used to lead. As for, like, the god, it looks, when you said, like, is it Manus? It might have been Manus. Because, like I was saying, there's all those, like, Dark Soul roots growing out of everything. And if you look at, like, early shots of Lothric, this didn't make it into the final game, but those roots are growing up the sides of the castle. And, like, the Lorien and Lothric, their whole deal is, like, they're princes, but they're princes of dark. Like, the Dark Soul is, like, the darkness is with them in a way that it's not with other, like, it's not like a sun kingdom anymore. And, it looks like, again, like, there's all this stuff about, like, basically Lothric is, like, Dark Soul stuff is growing out of the bottom of Lothric and consuming it. Very similar to, like, the Ringed City with those growths everywhere. So it looks like a lot of whatever was down there, like, it was partially recycled into the Ringed City. So it may actually have been, like, the grave of the Pygmies. We don't know. And even, like, the area where you fight Medea, like, that may... Oh, also, that's another thing. There's a cut boss called Mother Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like that may have been something to do with, like, you had Dragon Angel and then Mother Dragon. And Mother Dragon is probably, like, Medea 0.5.
Is it the big dragon we encounter in
Archdragon Peak?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this before, but, like, that dragon in Archdragon Peak, the absolutely massive one that you pray to, that's not terrain. That's that's a rigged model. It just doesn't do anything. So that looks like that might have been Mother Dragon. The other... Now, going back to, like, Osseros being weird, one of the things that we had talked about this before is that we were saying, oh, Osseros, clearly he was intended for Irithyll Dungeon because he looks like a successful version of the Dragon Prisoners. We now know that he wasn't.
Oh, were you wrong yet again?
Yeah. Yes, yet again. But like I was saying with Irithyll Dungeon and Profaned Capital being, like, a mandatory area right before this, it looks like that's what they're kind of setting up that boss by showing you these, like, failed attempts to become dragons that don't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Then you would leave, do something else, and then you get to this other area, and then you see, like, the success. You see, like, an actual dragon angel saying, like, I have the child of dragons. Like, it's perfect. I will not give it up.
So was it really his kid, or did he just create
It looks like it was. Well, we don't know. I mean, we might find out more, but, like, basically we just have, like, an untextured version that's really low poly and doesn't have any assets on it. So it's just, like, you can kind of see, okay, there's, like, some pretty severe drops in it and some, like, rickety bridges and stuff. It looks a lot like the underground parts of the Ringed City. And it looks like this, like, there was some sort of like maybe it was actually the Dark Soul that was buried underneath that.
Oh.
And that's why all the like dark stuff was growing up Lothric. And like we've talked about cut stuff before, and I'm sure people are thinking like, doesn't this contradict like there was another time we talked about Lorien and Lothric like being the final boss as opposed to the halfway boss, and it's like, yeah, it does. Because like everything it's been shuffled around so many times that like there's probably like 3 or 4 different versions of everything. What else do I have? Okay, so I'll just go through that list of like the significant game events. Okay, so this is the list of like the significant game events that would have happened in like it looks like the very first version. So move from Royal Castle to town is you going from Lothric Castle to Undead Settlement. Then the one immediately after that is before battle against the Lonesome King of the Ruined City. So like again, Undead Settlement would have connected to the Profaned capital. Then after that is before the battle against the Twin Dark Princes. So Lorien and Lothric come after Profaned capital. So they like again like they look like they were the Ornstein and Smough equivalent. Like you go and you fight like a double boss, and then that opens the rest of it. Immediately after that is move from the Royal Castle to the bridge, which we just talked about. Then you've got 3 in a row, which are this looks like this was the 3 Lords of Cinder to begin with. They may not have been called Lords of Cinder at this point, but they are King of the Storm, which is Nameless King. Wolf of the Eclipse that's the Abyss Watchers. They had a wolf with them originally. The Wolf of Farron, like what you would have fought the Abyss Watchers and the wolf at the same time. It's the boss fight in Ashes of Ariandel, where you fight the Gravekeeper and then like the wolf shows up.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what the original Abyss Watchers fight was like, and they kind of recycled it. So if you're wondering why like that thing is random and out of nowhere, it's like it's what they had planned and they didn't get a chance to do it until the DLC. And then the third one is just like the Deacons of the Deep. Here it's just called like the Gathering of Cardinals.
The Gathering of Cardinals? That sounds very Three Musketeers.
It doesn't mention Aldrich, but like presumably Aldrich is just considered like one of them. Well, it's also possible that Aldrich just doesn't exist at this point. Because like what they show you in the intro is just like a mass of goo.
Yeah.
So for all you know, like it may not have even been a person. It may just have been like they're sealing away the deep and there's just some slime in the deep that comes out, and that's the second phase.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think we mentioned this before, but the Aldrich model you fight isn't even Aldrich, it's just Lothric with a weird hat.
Oh yeah, you did mention it.
Yeah, and also like Rosaria was a boss.
Oh yeah.
She has a boss theme. Yeah. Good God. And like everything's a mess. And this I think we mentioned this before, but anyway, the final significant event in this list is reveal the ruins of Anor Londo in the desert.
Yeah.
So like if you're wondering like, hey, why is Anor Londo in a desert in the intro and in snow in the game? It's because they just colored the sand white and said it's snow now. So, like, originally the idea is it's like the intro, Anor Londo is buried in this, like, ash desert.
Mm-hmm.
And then they made that into the Boreal Valley by just changing the textures. So, like, the sand, now it's whitish blue, so it's snow. And, like, Zeno Lalia mentioned this to me. We were talking about it, and she said, like, I was looking at Irithyll and thinking like the sand, the snow here doesn't really fall like snow. It doesn't connect. It doesn't pile up like snow does. It piles up like dust and sand. And I'm like, yeah, that's because it's actually just sand that they've colored white. So yeah, the whole Boreal Valley thing was like not late, but it wasn't like always there. And that's why the intro, and that's why like going back to like the Ringed City, that's why the Ringed City you end up in like the ruins of an Anor Londo like place with all this like sand everywhere and like bits of that's what they were going with for what became Irithyll was like that. And I'm like, I think it may have had something to do with Karthus, because they make a big deal out of like Karthus of the Sands.
Yeah.
That Karthus was like, we never see it, but it was this implied to be kind of like vaguely Middle Eastern place with like scimitars and like sand everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking like that was probably part of it. And like apparently like there were painting guardians everywhere and stuff like that. Guarding Anor Londo. And yeah, the Anor Londo thing is like the absolute last point in like significant events. So like the end of the game, it looks like would have been Anor Londo. Like you would have had to go back there and do something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is, I guess that's God's grave. That's all we know. Lance has like, I think 2 different versions of the alpha, so more stuff might show up. But yeah, it looks like just to like recap, it looks like the structure that they started out with was that you start off in Untainted in Cemetery of Ashes normal, beat Vort, go down to the settlement. The settlement then like it looks like it's still connected to the cathedral, but the cathedral, it's blocked off or something. You can't, kind of like in Dark Souls 1, where there's like the yellow barriers. It looks like something like that was happening. Okay. Anyway, that's blocked off. You can't actually fight Lords of Cinder yet. Or else you can, but they don't. It's weird. It almost looks like whatever happens, they didn't count or something like that. It just references them later on. Whatever. You would go from the settlement to Profaned Capital / Irithyll Dungeon via the Curse-Rotted Greatwood. You would end up being captured and held in Irithyll Dungeon. You'd escape. Go back to Lothric with presumably something from Irithyll Dungeon. Fight Lorien and Lothric. That then opens up the bottom of Lothric Castle. You go down through that leads to a bridge. The bridge leads to God's Grave. Something in God's Grave happens, and then that unlocks 3 bosses, kind of like how at the end of Dark Souls 1, when you beat Ornstein and Smough, it unlocks the 4 bosses. In this case, there'd be 3, and they would be Nameless King, who was just called King of the Storm. Abyss Watchers with the Wolf, and Deacons of the Deep with Aldrich. And then when you beat all 3 of them, I'm not entirely sure what happens, but then Anor Londo appears. And you can go to Anor Londo, and that's the end.
And then what happened to Anor Londo?
We don't know.
Well, find out.
Well, I can tell you, like, you know the river in Irithyll that the bridge goes over? Yeah, that's like a chasm early on.
A what?
Like, when it's in the desert,
hole?
that's... When it's... Yeah, it's just like a... It's like just a chasm going down, and there's like more ruins under there.
Chasm of the Abyss?
A bit too sandy. I think it's more likely that God's Grave was Chasm of the Abyss. Like, there's some... God's Grave is very Dark Soul heavy. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it like... Again, like, it could be God or gods, because it doesn't specify singular or plural. It's possible it's the Pygmies.
Yeah, the picture you showed me...
Yeah.
It's like this spherical giant thing. Was really made me think of the Chasm of the Abyss.
Yeah. It could have been Manus. It could have been Karth. Like, it could have been anything.
Yeah.
And yeah, it again, like,
what about Gwyn?
Well, I was gonna say, like, the reason it's called Great Bridge of Pilgrimage, it looks like the pilgrims are trying to get to God's Grave. Rather than specific, as they are now, it looks like they're just going to Lothric. But here it looks like they're trying to get specifically to God's Grave, because that's where, like, something about the Dark Soul is, and that lines up with the Ringed City, because they kind of decided before the DLC came out that's where the pilgrims were going. So it looks like the pilgrims initially, like, they were on a pilgrimage to I guess get the Dark Soul or something, as in a similar way that they are now, but they're getting it from God's grave instead of the Ringed City.
So I wonder how much of the Ringed City used to be God's grave related.
We're thinking, like, a fair amount of it. Lance was also saying that, like, the bridge with the arches on it, like, he says that he thinks that might have been part of, like, God's grave as well.
Which bridge with the arches on it?
The one where you die like 400 times because it's bullshit.
I never die in Dark Souls 3. I'm a professional.
The orange archers come out of the ground and snipe you.
Oh, archers! I thought you said something else. Oh, archers. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, what? That's easy. Just hide behind a grave.
Yeah.
And then keep going. That is the easiest part of the Ringed City.
Yeah.
You died 400 times. It took you 400 times to figure out that you can probably not face these ghosts head on.
Well, there's a recording of me doing it live, so I think you can count how many times I died.
I think I will.
If you can be bought. Okay. It's less than 400.
Then why did you say 400? Did you imply I died 400 times on it?
Have you even played it?
What? Oh my god.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you have, yeah.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
You haven't beaten Dark Souls 1 or 2.
I have.
Okay, it's not like...
This is different. This was Dark Souls 3, which I played right after Bloodborne.
Oh, the best one?
Yeah. It was the best one in my heart, because I played it right after Bloodborne, and I was like, this is magnificent and awesome, and the lore is amazing. And then I played Dark Souls 1 and 2. You know what? Dark Souls 1 and 2 are the ones that are wrong.
Okay, that's fair.
So, what were you saying?
They're saying that it looks like they're going to the, get the... Like, it looks like it's the same kind of plot as the Ringed plot, in quotation marks, as the Ringed City. Where it's like, they're on a pilgrimage to this place where the Dark Soul is. Because they're really heavily flagging up that, like, either the Dark Soul or the Abyss or just some, like, mass of humanity is in God's grave. Which is why I'm thinking it might be the Pygmies.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also possible, like, it could have been Karth, like, it could have been Manus, it could have been Artorias, like, we don't know. Like, something that's full of Dark Soul was there.
Okay, we can figure it out. Let's think about this. Other than Manus and Artorias and Koth, who's into the Dark Soul?
Gale?
Well, he wouldn't be there. Maybe he'd want to go there to get his paint.
Are you suggesting that the character of Gale was hastily created? Not very well set up.
Oh my god, what if the painter girl was there?
She might have been. Yorshka was probably there.
What about...
both of her?
Yulia? No.
Yeah, Yulia of Londor.
No, Uria. No.
Yuria.
Yulia or Uria?
Yulia and Uria are the same word in Japanese, so it doesn't matter.
Ah. Isn't there also a Yulia in Derasne?
Yes.
Maybe... Richie! No! I got it! Richie!
Go on. Yes.
I know what's inside the god's grave.
What is it, Sin?
Derasne is inside the god's grave.
What, just like on DVD?
Like the whole thing, you go into the god's grave and you enter another dimension or whatever, and Derasne happens.
So you think they cut it because it required VR?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Miyazaki's like, fine, you can cut it, but I get to kill at least one child in this game. And they were like, okay, but he has to be invisible. Richie, you mentioned 2 epitaphs about blood and didn't say what they
I
said.
did, Sin. I'll say what they said now.
Are you making fun of me?
It's definitely the same recording. It's definitely not much later on afterward because I didn't have them written down because I'm an idiot.
Oh, good, because I thought you were making fun of me.
No. Okay, so the one in Irithyll Dungeon says, "A man who sought the throne sleeps here," and then it says the admission of blood was not to be. And I don't quite understand, like, because it's so contextual. Because, like, this wasn't ever translated into English, so I don't entirely know, like, what the admission of blood is not to be, like, meant. But it does reference blood, and like, does it mean like he wasn't admitted to the blood? He wasn't given the blood? I don't know. The blood did not accept him? I don't know.
The visual I have when you say it is what happens after the dancer fight, where the statue cuts itself and bleeds.
Yeah, I think it's that. This is what I think's happening. Because it says, like, the admission of blood was not to be. And I think that could also just be like the blood did not accept him or something. And then in Lothric, there's another epitaph that's like on the way to Lorien and Lothric that says, "Accept the blood, it is for the good of the damned royal family." So you've got these 2 epitaphs that both reference to like accepting or admitting blood. One is in Profaned Capital / Irithyll Dungeon, and one is in Lothric Castle. So it does look like whatever you did in Profaned Capital / Irithyll Dungeon, you would have gotten the blood and then taken it back to Lothric. And I think that's what the basin that Emma drops is. Because if you look at the structure, that's fucking bizarre. Where just Emma gives you a basin that it's like the Lord vessel. And then you fill it with blood that just comes out of a statue, and that opens a ladder. And it looks like that initially, like, we know from what Lance has done that, like, the ladder wasn't there initially. There's, like, just, like, a series of passageways behind her that there's no ladder or anything. It's structured more like a conventional castle rather than this weird ladder shit.
You know what, though? No, Richie.
Yeah.
Remember Dark Souls 1 had those weird twisty ladders all over the place?
No, what?
Dark Souls 1 had the weird ladders that twist and swirl.
What?
The ladders, the staircases.
Oh yeah, well the staircase isn't a ladder though. It's a different thing. Is a staircase a ladder? This is like some Reddit argument where you'll just Google staircase is actually a ladder, and then on like the 40th page of results will be someone saying it. You're like, there.
No, I'm Googling something else.
Checkmate.
Okay. There we go. Okay. Ladder. Staircase.
I know the staircases you mean. It's fine.
No. I will show you what's happening. So you understand how hard it is for me to live this life. I may be a little bit over dramatic. Okay, ladder. Do you see ladder?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Staircase. Do you see staircase?
Oh, yeah. So, like, you see it in your head and then you translate it from Russian to English. Yeah.
We use the same word for ladder and staircase, or at least use it very interchangeably.
There we go.
Yeah, лестница.
Yeah.
Лестница. Yeah. Just like there's a few words like that where I'm just like,
Apparently, leg and foot is one.
yeah, leg and foot, yeah.
Yeah, I know that because of Russian art of The Hobbit. Because The Hobbit's supposed to have hairy feet.
Mm-hmm.
But in the Russian artwork, he just has enormously hairy legs.
What I was trying to say is I was trying to make a funny, and then you were just like, that's not a letter, there's a staircase, it's not a staircase, it's a letter. So...
That's what I sound like now.
Yes, that's exactly what you sound like. And
it's like how the other times you impersonate, you're going, itchy, pitchy, 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 pitchy.
So I was trying to make a funny by saying that
Funny.
those weird staircases in Dark Souls 1 got an upgrade, and now it's weird letters that open up with a Lord Vessel.
Well, it was worth it.
Thank you. Yeah, so you were saying?
I can't remember.
You were saying something about your conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I think what would have happened is the beheading knight statue where you needed the bowl with the blood in it. That would have been there, but like it looks like maybe either the bowl or the blood would have been in Irithyll Dungeon / Profaned Capital. And that's why you had to go there before you went back to Lothric. And that's like, because there's that epitaph that's like someone did not accept the blood, or the blood would not accept him in the dungeon. And then in Lothric, like before the princes, there's this thing that's like, hey, you need to accept the blood for the good of the royal family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it looks like you would have had to do something with blood, and almost like, it almost does make me think of the way that the Lord Vessel has to be filled with souls. This is like you had to fill this thing with blood.
So instead of filling the Lord Vessel or whatever with souls, you'd have something to fill with blood.
It looks a bit like, it looks like the basin. Because the way you do it now is sort of weird, where just like, you get the basin, but then as soon as that happens, there's a boss fight. And like the basin is right near the thing you use the basin on. So like, it may as well just have been a boss fight and then the ladder fell automatically. Like it's a weird kind, it's not even a puzzle, it's just sort of there. But this looks like you may have had to get that item somewhere else first.
So it looks like my obsession with the Lord Vessel that we talked about in the first few episodes of the Snack Covenant is actually on point.
Jeff tried to block from memory.
But it's actually on point, Richie. Lord Vessel
is
on point.
It's more on point than the episodes were. So I recall being like a recap of the plot of Dark Souls, which I think got as far as Gwyn existing, and then you're like, but the Lord Vessel, Richard. What about the Lord Vessel?
Yeah. I wonder what famous person we could invite to talk about Lord Vessels.
Who would even...
I was thinking of inviting Jeremy and Aegon. Well, it looks like I should probably get ready to go to work.
Yep. I think we can salvage about 40 minutes of the last 90.
Do the outro, Richie.
Well, that was a discussion of God's Grave, the cut area from Dark Souls 3. By the time this comes up, Lance might have found more about it and made a good video. But if not, you've got this.
Thank you, Richie.
Thank you, Sin. That's okay.
For some reason, I always assume you wouldn't hear me if I whisper loudly into the microphone.
Just mentioning like, Richard's fucking awful. I hate him. I can't talk too loudly though, because he's listening.
Yeah.
Can I press stop now?
Yes.
Okay.